o'clock. We appreciate everybody that is joining us. I know we have a few folks still logging on. Keep in mind, if you miss any part of this, if you know of somebody that would be interested in a class like this, they are on our website. We'll show you that here at the end of the class. In fact, let's just hop out right now and just show you our website really quickly. At the end of the presentation, based on how you signed up with your email, hopefully you did it correctly. We will send you a course certificate, but we do have future classes coming up. This one is, of course, Hurricane Preparedness. We have a Weather Basics class, which goes over 5th grade weather standards. That will be next Tuesday. And going forward, it's 2 for Tuesdays, 2 on Tuesday at 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then 1 on Friday at 1 p.m. And that will go through the middle of April now, but we're looking to extend these classes right through the last part of the month. So the one today is going to talk about hurricane preparedness. We're going to talk a little bit about history in our area with a focus on Florence and some things you can do to prepare for the upcoming hurricane season. As far as who the Weather Service is, our main mission is to protect life and property. We do that all over the country itself. So we do issue 7-day forecasts to tell you what the weather's going to be like. But the main focus is certainly that big weather, hurricanes, blizzards, ice storms, and things of that nature. We have offices all over the country, from places like Puerto Rico down toward Hawaii, up toward Alaska, Maine, and Texas, and everywhere in between. Our local office here is in Newport, North Carolina, so we cover far eastern North Carolina. But I know we have some folks on this presentation from all over the country. You have a local office to serve your needs. Our local office here in eastern North Carolina covers roughly the eastern quarter of the state. If you've ever been to the Outer Banks or down toward the Crystal Coast, those areas that we serve. You will notice from this map, the yellow shaded area goes out into the ocean and the local sounds. We do cover out to 20 nautical miles for forecast and warnings. We do have sister offices that cover the rest of the state. So we have some people joining us from Raleigh. That office covers the central part of the state. The Wakefield or Richmond office covers northeast North Carolina, and the southeast part of the state is covered by the Wilmington office. Our office, like all local offices, are open 24/7 year-round. Christmas, Thanksgiving, weekends, holidays, we are at the office. We have a lower staff when the weather's quiet, at least 2 of us per shift, and a much higher staff when we have active weather. These pictures are from Hurricane Florence, where most of our staff was there 3 to 7 days. The lower left shows a picture of our building. It's a brick building with hurricane shutters. So we're reinforced to stay when the weather gets bad to serve your needs for weather. Our local website is weather.gov/Newport. I should point out, though, we mentioned a lot of folks are joining us from all across the country. If you just go to weather.gov itself, you can find your local forecast by clicking on the region of the country you live in. As you get to your local office, you can enter the city or zip code or click on the map itself, and you'll get a 7-day forecast, kind of a quick glance of the forecast. How warm is it going to be? How cold is it going to be? Is it going to rain, and what's the wind speed and direction for the next couple of days? I should mention, if you scroll down on the website a little bit, there's an hourly and graphical web forecast that you can have a lot more details if you need those. Also, by scrolling down on the website, our weather briefings, these are for active weather, so you won't see these when the weather's quiet. We may go weeks or even months without issuing a weather briefing, but during things like Hurricane Florence, the example is on the left, we issue a 5 to 15 page PDF that you can scroll through and see what's going on with upcoming severe weather. And then the other example is on the lower right during a winter storm. Your local office is doing these. It's really good information, all concise, so you can prepare for the upcoming severe weather if you're anticipating any in your local area. We are really big on social media. We like to use it in Newport to really let you know about upcoming weather. If we need to clarify anything, that's how we use social media. So the example on the left is from Hurricane Florence. We're going to talk in this class about how you should not focus on just the category of the storm. And the morning of landfall, Florence, if you remember, the category was diminishing, but that is only related to wind speed. And we wanted folks to still stand guard because we were still expecting impacts from flooding and storm surge. So categories only wind, and we didn't want folks to think that the storm wasn't going to be as bad. YouTube, we stream a lot of stuff on YouTube. This recording is going to be on YouTube afterwards, so you can review it and share it with people. And then during bad weather, any of those briefings we do to local officials, we usually do a 5 or 10-minute concise video on what we expect. We post that on YouTube as well. Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, just search NWS Morehead City and you'll find our information. Last but not least is our mobile forecast. We don't have an official app in the Weather Service, but if you go to mobile.weather.gov, you can save this to your Android or your iPhone by saving it or adding it to your home screen. In addition, if you're on a computer like I am right now, you can bookmark it and it will work on that as well. Acts very similar to an app. It's free. You don't have to search for it other than just going to that mobile.weather.gov website. All right, so that's a little bit about who the Weather Service is. Again, weather.gov is the main thing to get out of that, and we are open 24/7 to serve your needs. The main focus of this presentation is all about hurricanes. We're going to talk a little bit about what is a hurricane, how do they form. Then we're going to talk about some of the products that the National Hurricane Center issues. We're going to go over things about not focusing on the category and what that forecast cone means when you see a projected path of storms in the future. Hurricanes are the greatest storm on Earth. They can occur and last many, many weeks, maybe not in one specific location, but when you go from their birth to their ultimate demise, they can last many weeks on end, and they can impact states and places hundreds and hundreds of miles across. They are called different things across the world. Here in our part of the world, in the Atlantic Basin and the Pacific Ocean, if we've got some folks out toward California, they're called hurricanes. But down in the Southern Hemisphere toward Australia, they're actually called willy willies. And out toward places like Japan and China, they are called typhoons. So again, different names across the world. You may hear on the news a typhoon. It still is a hurricane. It's just a different name depending on the part of the world that it occurs. How hurricanes form, you need warm ocean water. This is why we do not get hurricanes in the wintertime. We're looking for water temperatures greater than 80 degrees. That's where hurricanes can really get a lot of their moisture. That warm, moist air converges and rises and condenses to form showers and thunderstorms. If you've seen some of our basic weather classes, we talk about areas of low pressure. It's marked with the letter L on the screen. That is a very intense area of low pressure is a hurricane. The big key, again, is you have got to have warm ocean water. And this is why as hurricanes come on land, gradually they weaken and eventually they die off. Doesn't happen right away. They're very powerful storms. So as soon as they hit land, they don't just stop immediately, but gradually they will weaken because, again, they need that heat source from the ocean. As we look inside of a hurricane, you may hear a lot about a hurricane eye. That's where the actual center of the hurricane is. The strongest part of the hurricane is encircled right around the eye itself, called the eye wall. That's where we have the strongest showers and winds. And then wrapping around the hurricane itself, again, it's a very intense area of low pressure, spinning counterclockwise. You have this bands of heavier rain and wind gusts. In these bands, sometimes you can get tornadoes, and locally, that's what we saw with Dorian on approach here this last fall. We mentioned the eye. If you were right in the middle of the eye itself, the winds would actually be light and sunny. That is where the lowest pressure is, and that's where the strongest air is rising. But immediately around the eye itself is the eye wall. That's where we have the strongest winds and rain. And we mentioned this before, spiral rain bands can occur well ahead of the storm itself. This is where we can have some heavy rain and winds and also some weak tornadoes. I'm going to hop out of the presentation and show you this loop on YouTube of Hurricane Katrina. Some of you may not remember this. This occurred back in August of 2005. This is a satellite loop where we actually look down from outer space, down at the ocean and the land. The white area is representing any of the clouds, and in this case, showers and thunderstorms. So this storm is now across southern Florida on August 26th, but notice those bands spiraling around the storm itself. As the storm gets over the very, very warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, you're going to start to notice that eye form. And that is the strongest part of the storm. There it is right there. Again, the eye wall around it is where we see the strongest winds and rain, and eventually making landfall toward the 29th of August in 2005 across Louisiana. So that's Hurricane Katrina. And again, you can see the storm as it moves over the land, it starts to fall apart because it's lost that source of heat from the ocean itself. So that's a satellite loop, and that's how we can look at storms, and we know that they're occurring perhaps many weeks away from us out over the ocean itself. We're going to switch gears now and talk a little bit about climatology. And what we mean by that on this map is showing the peak of the hurricane season. Hurricane season officially doesn't start until the first day of June, but we're going to highlight on this that we can get storms really any of the months in late spring through right into fall here across eastern North Carolina. I'm going to see if I can get this pen to work on here. Let's see here. All right, so we'll give this a go. So this is the peak of the hurricane season. What you see, this yellow shaded area here are just hurricanes. And then the orange shaded area, that is a combination of hurricanes and tropical storms. And you'll see the peak gradually rises. I'm going to change my color here so that you might be able to see it a little bit better. You can see that there's not a lot of storms the first part of the year for May, June, or even July, but gradually the peak itself goes way up, and it usually peaks about the middle part of September. Dorian and Florence occurred right along that peak. So our peak does not occur until the middle part of September. That's why we tell folks if we get into late August and we haven't had a storm, do not let your guard down because the peak is not occurring until the middle part of September. Unfortunately, here in eastern North Carolina, we have seen storms as early as May and June. So this is why we start talking hurricane preparedness as early as the month of April. And we've seen storms as late as well into October, like with Hurricane Sandy. So while the peak of the season is middle of September, we really can get storms anytime after May 1st here across our area. The next couple slides are going to talk about hurricane preparedness. A couple of good websites are weather.gov or ready.gov. There's a lot of things you should be doing for preparedness. I'm going to focus on what I think are the two best things you can do even now. Number one is disaster supplies, making sure you have food, water, medicine, cash on hand. You have those supplies to sustain yourself. The graphic here says 3 days, and that would probably be a bare minimum. Having lived through Florence, a lot of us were without power up to a week. Here locally, we're saying more up to a week of your medicine, food, and water. And the reason for that is things don't get back to normal sometimes for up to a week in terms of your normal everyday shopping at the grocery store. So you want to have those supplies on hand so that you don't need to sneak out as the storm is still ongoing or as there's still trees and power lines down on the roads. The other thing that's good to do, and again, these are things you can do now, in terms of making a plan, writing down what you need to do, taking documentation of your house, your valuables, knowing where all your important documents are, and then sharing your plan with your family. So for example, here in the Weather Service, the family that is working at the Weather Service stays, but we certainly have significant others and children back home. So a lot of us have plans for where our family is going to go. For me, it's either South Carolina or Maryland where I have family, depending on the storm track. So those are things you want to think about now, today, the next month. You don't really want to wait for right before the storm itself happens. We get a lot of good products from the National Hurricane Center, and we're going to go over those now. We're going to talk about what you may already know about them and some things you might be surprised. Any of these you can get at hurricanes.gov. I love that website. It's very easy to remember, just hurricanes.gov. There's something called a graphical tropical outlook. That is issued, and it is issued 4 times a day, and it provides an outlook going forward on what the potential is for upcoming storms. So this is an older example, but just shows that, hey, where we need to focus in on where's the highest chance that storms may actually form. So this is a good website to know well ahead of any storms forming, and just to kind of keep in mind what may be coming up over the next couple days to weeks. How many are familiar with this one? A lot of people probably have seen this one before. The forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. We want to talk about what this represents and what it doesn't represent. The forecast cone is actually the most probable path for just the center of the storm. So 2/3 of the time, the center of the storm, based on past statistics and accuracy of the hurricane center, is going to move in that cone itself. But what it doesn't show you is the impacts away from the storm itself. So for example, I'm going to show you this with Florence. I think it was one of the best examples. A very good forecast from the Hurricane Center. You can see the track. This is on the, looks like the afternoon of the 12th. So many days prior to landfall. And you'll notice that the forecast cone leaves out part of eastern North Carolina because we've gotten close at this point. And specifically on that, New Bern is not on there. This forecast cone itself only shows the most probable path for the storm. It does not show the impacts. Impacts occur well away from a storm, so that's one thing to remember. Number two, I'll go back one. 2/3 of the time, based on the accuracy of the Hurricane Center, it's going to go in this path. But 1/3 of the time, it's not going to go in the path. So when you use this cone, realize it is only the center of the storm. Impacts can occur hundreds of miles away. So if you're anywhere in the general vicinity of this path, you should be paying attention. So in this case, you know, folks across South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida should still be paying attention. Or up toward Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey should still be paying attention. They're not in the cone, but they are close enough that they should be paying attention. If there's any adjustments to the track, or again, if the storm is hundreds of miles wide, you may still be impacted even if you're not necessarily hit by the center itself. Now we're going to talk about some of the different impacts you can get. Wind gets the most notoriety, but I'm going to try to have you focus on all of the impacts with upcoming storms, because it's not just wind that can impact you. There's a lot of threats with hurricanes. And then we'll turn it over to you for any questions here at the end. Most of you are probably familiar with this. Is it a category 1 or 2 or 4 or 5? This is the Saffir-Simpson scale, and it's used to categorize the hurricane's strength just based on wind speed. It gives us an estimate of potential property damage, but it has nothing to do with anything besides wind. So it doesn't tell you how large the storm is. It doesn't tell you how slow moving it is, or if it's going to produce 40 inches of rainfall. The category is only related to wind. And a lot of times locally, we'll hear folks say, I'm not going to leave unless it's a 2 or 3. And we try to tell them that that's only the wind speed. Depending on where it hits, how fast it's moving, how much rain you may have a worse impact with a category 1 than you do a 3. So please, anytime you see what the category of the storm is, it's important, but it's only part of the puzzle. It doesn't mean that you don't respect a 3 or 4. It just means that look at all the impacts and don't just focus on the category to make your decisions. We're going to go in order in terms of what unfortunately has caused the most loss of life going forward, to kind of change you in terms of just focusing on the category or the wind speed. One thing that's not taken into account for the category is water, but unfortunately that traditionally has killed the most people. These statistics are older, but I'll show you how Florence still panned it out. So up through 2012, about half our deaths were storm surge, and about another third were rain. So 80% of people that die in a hurricane or tropical cyclone, it's because of water. If you squint or look at the number on the graph or on the right, less than 10% die because of wind. Can trees fall on you during a storm and hurt you? Yes. But it's the water that is our biggest problem. Either storm surge, which is the rise of water ahead of a tropical cyclone, or rainfall flooding, on local creeks and streams and rivers. Let's look at Florence. You might say, well, Eric, those are older statistics. Have things changed? Not so much with water. Florence killed 15 people directly in our state. Of those, 11 were water related. Now, one improvement we've made, and that's thanks to the Hurricane Center and others, our storm surge deaths are going down, which is certainly good news, and I'll show you one of the reasons for that. But still, water is our biggest issue in terms of tropical cyclones. One thing that we've done, the Hurricane Center in conjunction with local offices, is issue storm surge watches and warnings. These are regardless of if it's a hurricane or not. Again, you could have a tropical storm, not even a category 1, not on the category scale, and have dramatic storm surge. These storm surge watches are issued for life-threatening inundation. We consider that 3 feet or higher. On the right is the example during Florence, upgrading those areas to the storm surge warning, and the potential values of greater than 9 feet in this example. That was one of our biggest issues with Florence, was water, rainfall, and storm surge. We had 8 to 11 feet of storm surge up in New Bern, over 1,800 water rescues, and 2 to 4 feet of surge along the Crystal Coast. And again, that's that push of water ahead of a storm itself. A lot of you will remember rainfall flooding. It seemed like the rain would never stop with Florence. That's another threat that you can get with any landfalling tropical cyclone. These are some specific values, almost 35 inches of rain in Swansboro. Again, that was over many, many days. This is our local map, and it shows you a couple things. You folks up to the north escaped this storm by and large, but anytime you see a rainfall map, if you're on the edge of really heavy rain, notice how heavy it is down here. Just a slight shift northward or southward with that track would shift that bullseye of heavy rain. So if you're watching from Dare County, Washington, Martinsville, or Williamston, Martin County, you could have been under the gun for heavy rain and wind if this storm just shifted 50 or 75 miles north. So please keep that in mind. I wanted to show you the state view too. The landfall of the storm was again around Wrightsville Beach, which is across eastern New Hanover County. So that yellow dot I just drew on the map. Remember we said that impacts occur well away from the center of the storm? Look at how much of the state saw more than 10 inches of rainfall, many miles away from the center. So when you see that hurricane forecast cone, that's just for the most probable path of the center, does not show all of the impacts that may occur with a storm. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of experience with storms. Back to Matthew in 2016. This is a picture of some water over a road. I think this is out in Duplin County. What a lot of folks don't realize is water crossing the road, number one, is very powerful. It can easily sweep you away. But number two, you don't know if that road is even there anymore, especially at night. So our big campaign with that is turn around, don't drown. If you see any water that's crossing a roadway, it's better just to turn around. Again, water is very powerful, and the road itself might not exist anymore. So I think it's more than 50% of the lives lost in flooding occur in automobiles. So it's way up there in terms of statistics, and a lot of them occur, unfortunately, in automobiles. So those are preventable deaths if people would turn around. With all that rain, as you might imagine, we had a lot of flooding. Some of these values exceeded our record levels in Hurricane Floyd back in 1999. So for the long timers that have lived here, anytime we mentioned Floyd, that was kind of the benchmark. And we went above that with the heavy rain from Florence. This is the Trent River at Pollocksville. Again, in addition to the river flooding, we had extensive flash flooding as the rain fell and for days prior, and then all that water goes into the rivers. Third on this list is wind. Again, the category is only related to wind, but we don't cover it until number 3 on here. And it's not that wind is not dangerous. It's just, again, statistically, water is going to be the biggest issue. We had some wind gusts over 100 miles per hour in our area. And you can see from the house behind us, the biggest issue for a lot of us was losing our roofing material. And that caused a lot of water issues in homes. So when you see this map, if you're not from the area, you might say, wow, those winds aren't that strong for a hurricane. Keep in mind, this was over 3 to 4 days. We had sustained winds that were very, very strong. And because of that, trees, gradually got weaker. Because of the saturated soil, trees became uprooted and would fall down with time. Your roofing material, let's say you have a tornado and it does damage to your house, and then the next couple of days it's sunny, you can get up there and you can fix it, you can tarp it up and prevent future damage. With Florence going 3 to 4 days of wind, you couldn't get up there and fix it, and you had continued rainfall on top of it. So it was a really bad situation. I think the duration is the biggest thing a lot of us will remember. So we talked about storm surge, we talked about rainfall and wind. Those are probably the big three in terms of what people associate with hurricanes or tropical cyclones. Tornadoes are another one. In the beginning, I mentioned those spiraling rain bands that come on shore. Often the first ones well ahead of the center can produce weak tornadoes. We had over 25 confirmed tornadoes with Florence. And sometimes these can occur well away from landfall. The case with that was with Dorian, one of the first outer rain bands that moved ashore that morning. That produced, I think it was an EF2 tornado in Emerald Isle. So again, anytime we get a tropical system, it doesn't have to be a major hurricane, even quote unquote, just a tropical storm can produce these tornadoes because of the rotation with the storm itself. We're at about 125. We've got a couple more slides, then we're going to turn it over to you. So as you see this presentation, if you've thought of any questions, ask them through the webinar itself. If you have a microphone and you want to raise your hand when we get to the question part, I will call on you and you can ask your questions. So we're just about wrapping up things here. Last but not least, rip currents. That is another threat that you can get. So we talked about wind, rain, storm surge, tornadoes. The fifth threat is rip currents. This is a graphic from our friends down at the Wilmington office. They did a lot of research on a recent one that you might not remember. A lot of us remember Dorian, but how many of you remember Hurricane Lorenzo? If I could see you all, I probably would not see any hands raised. The reason why you don't remember Hurricane Lorenzo is it was over 2,000 miles away. It was the middle of September to the middle or first couple of days of October. It was a huge hurricane. In fact, the northernmost Category 5 on record in the Atlantic Ocean. It recurved well out to sea, so that's why most of you don't remember it. But the energy generated from the storm produced the big swell along the East Coast, and we actually had 4 rip current related deaths due to Lorenzo in the Carolinas and 7 up and down the East Coast. So even though a storm might be distant or well ahead of a storm, we can have dangerous rip currents. And again, we're not talking right during a storm, nobody swimming when the storm is happening. We're talking distant hurricanes, or we're talking well ahead of a system. Our big campaign with rip currents is, try to float or swim parallel. So this diagram shows a rip current is a very narrow stream of water that takes you out. It does not pull you under. So in this case, if you were to swim left or right or parallel to the shore, once you're out of that narrow stream of water, you're not feeling resistance pulling you out, and you can come back in and swim safely back to shore. One thing we tell our kids, you certainly want them taking swimming lessons, but I always like our kids to have some type of flotation with them. Just a simple boogie board that you can jump on. And so, when you get swept out and you can't touch, sometimes you're not thinking correctly. But if you can sit on that boogie board and think, what did Mr. Eric say? What did the folks at the Weather Service say? They said float and then try to swim left or right. Just that additional 5 seconds to think, what am I supposed to do, can really help you out, because once you can't touch, sometimes people panic and they don't remember the safety tips. So as we wrap things up, remember the category of the storm does not tell you about all the impacts. It only tells you about how strong the winds will be. Be sure to understand the surge products that we send out. Heavy rain is a big issue. Never, ever, ever drive through flooded roadways. That's where we lose a lot of lives. And have multiple ways to get warnings. I know a lot of folks take hurricanes serious and they're hunkered down and they're in their home. But remember, we can also get tornadoes out of these. So be prepared to seek shelter in an interior room with short notice, because hurricanes can produce tornadoes. We're just at about the 30-minute mark, so my email address is on the screen if you have any questions. We've done a lot of these virtual classes before, usually for spotters, but we welcome the feedback. If you have any ideas or you like it, send me an email. Thanks to one of our forecasters, Mike Lee in the office, he made some really cool certificates. So after this class, you will get a hurricane preparedness certificate sent to the email you signed up. So